Welcome back to The Big Picture. We are continuing our discussion of politics with political strategist Vic Martucci and Jack O'Donnell. And we turn now to the Senate confirming Amy Coney Barrett in the Supreme Court.
Look, I think whatever you may think of the judge herself, I think this process has done nothing but increase enthusiasm and drive Democrats to the polls. It absolutely was rushed. It was absolutely done at the last minute, contrary to some principles that Republicans in the Senate claimed to believe in 4 years ago. And I think we've seen a lot of maybe younger millennial voters who in the past weren't super enthusiastic about Joe Biden, maybe been in politics too long, too corporate, too whatever, saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to vote for Joe, but I am going to vote for Ruth, and coming out and placing their vote. And it certainly led to some enthusiasm on the Democratic side. It
motivated them, in other words, I think, is what Absolutely. You're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned the last time we were together, Judge, the polling has really shifted on that question from the day that Justice Ginsburg passed to the last few days prior to the confirmation of Judge Barrett. And that is that more and more Americans have become accepting and approved of Judge Barrett being confirmed prior to the election. So I don't see the confirmation having much of an impact on the election. In terms of raw meat to the base, there's no question. I think Jack is right. The Democrats will try to use that as motivation to get parts of their base out that typically are difficult to come out and vote. But on the Republican side, the president has delivered on a promise that he made 4 years ago, and that was to appoint conservative justices from the Supreme Court down to the federal courts. And he's delivered on that promise. And the other thing I would say is I think a lot of Americans have become almost numb to the political process in Washington. They understand it. I really believe you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody out there that doesn't think that if Chuck Schumer was the majority leader and there was a Democrat president and the roles were reversed, that Chuck Schumer wouldn't have done the same thing. I think people understand that's the nature of politics. As President Obama famously said, elections have consequences, and the Constitution provides for the process that occurred.
And so many other things have come to the forefront to take the place of that issue too, I think. And so the other big issue that continues to impact everyone, of course, is COVID-19. And again, both candidates have taken very different approaches. Jack, how do you think the pandemic is going to play into the presidential decision?
I think for a lot of voters, it's the number one thing on their mind, not just the disease itself, but how it's impacted the economy, how it's impacted their lives, whether their kids are in school, whether they've gotten sick or someone they know. And I think, we saw the president and his chief of staff saying this week that it was over. At the same time, the country's hitting the highest rates of hospitalization that we've seen. So I really think this is motivating a lot of voters. I think it's motivating a lot of the early votes. And I think it's totally undermined some of the president's reelection themes, right? He had a huge advantage when it came to the economy, and that's collapsed because I think the economy has collapsed because of the pandemic and because of the White House's failed response to it.
You don't think that's true, do you?
Well, there's no question that the pandemic is the weakest part of the weakest issue for the president. And Jack will tell you this too. When you're advising candidates, one of the most important strategies in a campaign is to control the message. And if the message is focused on an issue that's your weakness, you're in trouble. If the message is on an issue that plays to your strength, now you're controlling the debate. And the president has not been able to successfully change the focus of the campaign from his weakness, which is his handling of the pandemic, to issues that are playing to his strength. So from that perspective, there's no question it's hurting him. You know, I've always believed you can only do so much whining and complaining about what the press is doing. It's incumbent on our candidates and our political parties to figure out a way to effectively communicate your message. And if you're not doing that, that's your fault. That's nobody else's fault. And I believe that. I advise my clients that way, that's our job, is to control the messaging and to effectively communicate it. And if we're not doing that, that's on us.
Jack, how do you do that? How do you handle strategizing when you say you're talking to the candidates and you're a consultant? What do you do?
Well, the first thing you do is spend some time with the candidates and try to understand where they're coming from, right? Why are they running? What do they want to do? And help them find a way to articulate that message, right? And sometimes in movies, you'll see political consultants tell candidates what to say. But I think in reality, most of us don't want to change what you have to say or what you're trying to do. It may be to help you say that a little better, and then help you figure out the mechanisms of a campaign. Should you be on this show? Should you be on some other shows? Where is your audience, right? How do you put together a win plan, which is, this is how many people we think are going to vote. How do you go to your voters? Vic mentioned earlier, trying to play to your strengths, right? Figuring out what issues that you care about maybe match up with some of the voters, and helping them put a whole plan together around that to get to victory.
Is that what you're doing now? Is that how you do it too?
Oh,
Pretty much?
absolutely, absolutely. And Jack's absolutely right. This notion that political consultants tell a candidate what they should think, and what their policy positions are is really nonsense. That doesn't happen.
I think we got that from the movies, from
Exactly,
films, the
exactly.
candidate, or remember Robert Redford in those movies
right.
where they tell them,
He famously asks his political
yes.
consultant
What do I do
after
now?
he wins, what do I do
What do
now?
I do now?
That rarely happens. It's the job of the consultant to take who the candidate is and what their positions are on the issues and package it in a way that you can more effectively communicate it to the voters.
Now, before COVID, Trump always was citing the robust economy and the stock market as something his presidency was responsible for, and recent headlines are now indicating the stock market is going down and death rates are surging according to the media of COVID. And so how is this going to affect the election, do you think?
Well, I'll say this, the death rates are not surging. Positive tests are surging, and to a certain degree in hot spots around the country, hospitalizations are. But the one thing that has occurred from the beginning of the pandemic until now, and the president's administration has a lot to do with this, and he has not very effectively communicated it, is that we found ways to treat the disease better when people are hospitalized. In a lot of ways, that's because of the aggressive stance that the administration took on researching therapeutic drugs. So from that perspective, even though we're seeing the surge that all the experts predicted, you're not seeing the same mortality rate. And I think that's an important distinction.
What about the economy?
The economy, there's no question. The economy is in the tank because of the pandemic. And if the voters perceive that the president mishandled the pandemic, they're going to blame him for the state of the economy. And that's clearly what the polls are showing today.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Jack, what do you think the economy is going to be very helpful to Biden? The stock market and so forth?
I think absolutely. Before, a year ago, most polling showed that even people who had some concerns about President Trump supported him because he had helped create this strong economy. And you can argue about whether that started under Obama or not, but the reality is it's gone. And it's gone in large part because the president hasn't taken this pandemic, hasn't taken this disease seriously. right? Vic can talk about some of the things the administration has done, and they probably deserve some credit for that. But they're not going to get it while the president is standing up in front of unmasked, huge crowds and saying that the disease is over and just, go and everything will be okay. I think every scientist will tell you that that's not the way to approach this. And there are ways to deal with it. And even if parts of it are getting better, that's not true in everyone's lives. And they're watching these hospitalizations spike, and they're worried for themselves and their families.
And I talked about this with Vic before, the polling, the effective polling, how effective it is. Do you see any changes in the polling? I know you do polling as well as Vic. What do you see, any trends or what's happening?
I think that we haven't seen a huge change in polling, other than I do think more of the national pollsters are what we call waiting for education and making sure that the education level of the respondents matches the electorate that they're looking at. But I think maybe Americans and hopefully somewhat the media have become a little bit more informed about what a poll really is. And they were showing all these polls, these national polls, and that weren't even likely voters. And those things are deceptive. I think a good pollster, and I think Vic and I probably know the difference between a good pollster and a bad one, has been doing those things for years. And you work with them to figure out what your plan looks like, what your electorate might look like. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to understanding that polling is really a snapshot in time. If you look at the congressional district polling from 2016, it showed that Hillary Clinton was in trouble in Wisconsin and Michigan and parts of upstate New York and all those different places, even if the national polls hadn't picked that up.
A lot of this, Vic, you taught me last time when we talked about this, a lot of the polling is in the interpretation too. Right. I mean, who's interpreting it?
And it's trends. When you look at the polling data, you want to look at trends. And 4 years ago, you could see in the battleground states that the polls were moving towards Donald Trump, and so this notion that the polling was wrong is a myth. Because the national polls were dead on. They had Hillary Clinton winning by 3%. She won by 2.6%. But if you looked at the state polling in battleground states, they were all trending towards Donald Trump. So what I will tell you to answer your question this year is, if you're a Republican or if you're a Trump supporter, what's disturbing is that in those key battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, if Joe Biden flips those 3 states, he's president of the United States. The polls have not moved in the last 10 days. Biden's lead in all 3 of those states are outside of the margin of error, and they're not moving towards Donald Trump. He has 7 days to change that, although 62 million people have already voted. So that's a problem as well.
That's what's so unusual.
And I would...
Jack, yes?
And I would just add to that, the other difference in the polling from 4 years ago is that Joe Biden is not carrying the same negative or disapproval ratings that Hillary Clinton did. And we're not seeing the same support for third-party candidates.
Well, let me say this, which I guess everyone's heard a million zillion times. The big picture here is that voting is important.
Yes.
And everyone should either vote by mail, go out early, or show up at the polls on Election Day. I want to thank my guests, Vic Martucci from Mazziello, Martucci, Calabrese and Associates, and Jack O'Donnell from O'Donnell and Associates, 2 top political strategists recognized across the country, and we are so lucky to have them based right here in Buffalo. I'm Penny Wolfgang. Our political discussions will continue. Thanks for watching The Big Picture, and thanks for watching WBBZ-TV.